Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast, where we triple your impact per engineer. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor, consultant, coach to tech execs worldwide, and our subject today is Leaky Sprints. Before we get to that, I'm reminding you, I have a new community. This is my thing for the next couple of quarters. A community for tech executives, for CEOs to talk together, to work together, to not have to go it alone, even if you don't pay an expensive coach like me. This is how you can help yourself. I am inside of a consultants community and realize how much it has helped me in my personal growth. And then I was like, why don't I help all of you have the same? So this is something that I'm incredibly excited about, and it is free. So check out the link in the show notes. You're going to get a whole lot out of it, I'm sure, and I'm pumped, waiting to see you there. All right. Now, Leaky Sprints. At the beginning, I wanted to call this something like sprints from Shein or sprints from Wish.com. Here in Israel, we would say sprints from AliExpress, because I want to talk about what ends up happening in many good companies, where by the time you get to the end of the sprint, or when you get to the end of a big project, what you have looks nothing like what you had discussed at the beginning. And it's like those memes you see online of, someone ordered a dress, it looks like this on the website. When I got it, it looks hideous. And this is something that I see everywhere. And these leaky sprints are sprints where you start with a given set of capabilities with a specific scope, and by the time you reach the end of it, so much has been cut, so much has been lost, it is no longer the same thing. It's like a game of telephone where every single day things get more and more distorted, so that by the time we got to the end, we no longer have what we had in mind. And there are two very critical ways where this sort of distortion happens. The first is when we do not communicate well enough during the sprint and the engineers don't have enough product mastery. And therefore, it is sort of like trying to convey an idea when both parties don't speak fluently the same language. And therefore, you tell me something, I think I understand what you're talking about, but we never talk again. I don't really understand all the nuances in the language we just spoke, and I just try and build something. And had we been talking every day, you would have corrected me earlier. If we only talk at the end of the sprint, you're going to find out way too late where I have been building a bunch of things based on a misguided snapshot of our conversations we had a few weeks ago. The same can happen when teams are intent on scope bleeding. That is the opposite of scope creep. Scope creep is when, I'm guessing as you're working, someone comes up to you and says, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And you're just saying yes and yes, and the deadline gets pushed more and more. Scope bleed is the exact opposite, where teams have learned that they can just come up and say, I'm sorry, we realize that this is a lot more complicated, or we cannot do it like you asked, we're going to do it this way. And sometimes these constraints are real. Sometimes they have value, because if you find a quicker way to get to value for the client, this is a win-win. If we see that this is essential, we're going to add it later, that's fine. But too many have learned that they can use this, they can wield this weapon of cutting the scope so easily that by the end of the sprint, it no longer makes sense. We've cut it so hard that what we have is not what we had intended to. Oftentimes, and I know because I ask people, what you have at the end of the sprint, even though for some reason people consider it a success because after we have agreed upon cutting the scope, the team is successful. They did what was agreed upon. What you have actually achieved has no real significance, in a way where I ask the VP of product and I say, had you known this is what you would have gotten 2 weeks ago, would you have signed it off? They would have said, no, I don't want this. This doesn't help me. But no one is having these conversations, especially if you convey the feeling where it's not possible to do anything else. And this is aimed directly at you, the tech executives who have the power here to create a culture where this is not something that happens willy-nilly, where this is not something that we allow ourselves to do consciously or unconsciously, because it is not fine. Yeah, you have to be cutting scope. Yeah, you need to be having those conversations, but you shouldn't do that merely because you believe that's going to get you to have a nicer week, or because no one really has the energy right now to solve that, or you aren't sold about why the users even need this. You have to trust the product people. You can question them, but you cannot just run over them, override their plans merely because your people are the ones typing on the keyboard. That's not healthy. And this sort of scope bleed is why you see so many teams that are no longer trusting one another, because what we see when we go into planning, when we start having conversations about scope, is that we get two adversarial organizations. One wants to hold on to what they had in mind when they spec'd the feature, and the other is like holding a scalpel, just wants to cut more and more and more. You cannot get a good product out of that. You have to have people working together because, as I said, product engineering is one entity. Even if it's across two different departments in your company, it's still one entity. You can't have a product organization that wins without the engineering organization having a win as well. No product specs, no matter how amazing, are going to get you business success. So stop it. And if you see that this is what your people are doing, intervene. Show them that you and the VP of product are best buddies. This is the most important relationship for you within the company, and it is what matters. And therefore, maybe, just maybe, you're going to have sprints that look like you ordered them, I don't know, from Amazon, okay? Nothing fancy, but just pretty much what you had expected. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me again. Check out the new community. Link in the show notes, and if you sign up, you're going to get my newsletter, which is amazing. It's the best newsletter online for tech execs. That's it for this week. Talk to you next week.